Let's bring in our guests now. Still with us is Turkey's former Minister of EU Affairs and member of the ruling AK Party, Egemen Bagis. Along with him is Borzou Daraghi, a journalist specializing in Middle East affairs. In Chapel Hill, North Carolina, we have former U.S. Ambassador to Turkey, Robert Pearson. In New York, former U.S. diplomat Peter Galbraith. And finally in Moscow, former Russian diplomat Viacheslav Matuzov. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Now, I want to ask you all the same question to begin with so we know where everybody stands. Let me start with you, Peter Galbraith. What do your instincts tell you after President Erdogan has been re-elected and elected as Turkey's first executive president? Is that going to change Turkey's foreign policy at all?
It might. Now he has a mandate. I think it's possible that he could, and certainly I would hope that he would resume the peace process with the Turkish Kurds. He doesn't need to play so many of the nationalist cards that he had played. So there's an opportunity for him to do something different. I wouldn't bet on it, but I think it's possible.
Okay, interesting. I'm gonna get a response from Egemen Bagis about playing the nationalist cards. But before that, let me go to Robert Pearson. Robert Pearson, is Turkey's foreign policy going to change after the election?
We don't know yet. The election wasn't really focused on foreign policy issues, and so now all of those issues, the European Union, Russia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, the United States are still on the table, and so we'll see what the new government has to say about those and how the parties respond.
Viacheslav Matuzov, Turkey has a good relationship with Russia right now. Do you expect any of that to be any different?
I think that Mr. Putin is happy and satisfied and happy with this election because Russian-Turkish relations pass through different periods. It's the worst when it was jet fighter was set down, and after that it is collaboration, coordination of foreign policy steps in Syria and achieving good results. I think it is a good experience, and Mr. Putin is satisfied the results of this election because it is very good for future Russian-Turkish relationship.
Okay, so Borzou Daraghi, let me ask the question in a slightly different way. President Erdogan has lost, I guess, a little bit of ground in some senses in the fact that there was an anxiety before the election, right? But did he lose enough for him to change anything in terms of foreign policy?
I don't think that he is going to change foreign policy because by and large, almost all of his foreign policy shifts were rooted in pragmatism and opportunity rather than ideology. With one exception, I think that one thing that could very well change, everything else I think will stay the same. Russia, Iran, tensions with the US will continue just because their interests are not aligned. With one exception, possibly Syria. I think you could see more ambitious moves on the part of the Turkish government vis-a-vis Syria because now this issue, one of the guests said that foreign policy was not a domestic issue in this election except for Syria. I think that was an important issue. And I think that you could see Erdogan being willing to take more risks in terms of Syria.
Okay, so let's ask the man who's in government, is that something that's going to happen? Foreign policy staying largely the same, but maybe a bit more bold, a bit more aggressive in Syria?
Well, Turkey's foreign policy will be partially determined by the foreigners on how they will treat us. They cannot expect to be our allies and work against our interests, and our neighbors have to understand Turkey's sensitivities. Turkey's foreign policy is shaped with the perceptions of the public. Turkey is a democracy, as we saw yesterday. And in democracies, public opinion does matter. You cannot go against your public policy. You cannot act against the expectations of your own people. So Turkey is an indispensable part of the European and Euro-Atlantic institutions. We are trying to become a member of European Union, but we're also very close with Russia. They are our third biggest trading partner. We have more than $23 billion worth of trade with them last year.
But at the moment, okay, sorry to interrupt you.
Turkey is the most eastern part of the West and the most western part of the East, as I always repeat.
Right, allow me to interrupt you.
Our policies have to be based on our own interest.
You want the balance. Well, hold on. You want the balance. But at the moment, in the immediate aftermath of the election, the only people calling up to congratulate were the people from the East. So we have Rouhani and Aliyev and Hamas and so forth. The Western leaders, they were still trying to figure it out.
I mean, we received calls today from Bulgaria, from Greece, from Brussels. They started calling, and because of time difference, while we're recording this, maybe President Trump was not available to call him, but I'm sure he will call within a few hours. That's only normal because he won with a landslide victory.
Okay.
I'm talking about President Erdogan. But what I'm saying is the meeting between the Secretary of State Pompeo and Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu on June the 3rd and the 4th was very successful regarding Münbiç. If they keep their promises, Turkey will also keep her promises towards our alliance. At the same time, President Putin and President Erdogan enjoy a very fruitful relationship, which is important for our economic interests.
Can I bring in some of the others? I want Peter Galbraith to clarify exactly what he meant when he said Erdogan won't have to play the nationalist cards, because then I can get a response. What did you mean by that? Do you mean the domestic alliance with the MHP or something else?
Well, yes, domestic politics. Obviously, what was it? Several years ago, his party lost the parliamentary majority. After that, he broke off the peace negotiations with the PKK. And that turned out to be an electorally good thing to have done, because in the next elections, he won a majority again, and that paved the way for the revision of the Constitution and to his electoral victory now. Nonetheless, for the future of Turkey...
It wasn't the parliamentary distribution that caused us to cut off the relations. Right after that election that he mentions, the PKK started attacking every city in Turkey: Antep, Maraş, Elazığ, Istanbul, Ankara. And they raised the level of terrorism so much that the government had to govern and go after the terrorists. It was not a political decision, it was a defense.
We could have a lengthy discussion of who was responsible for what and who broke it off. But it began in a very small way, with a kind of confused incident that the government then played on. The PKK responded unwisely. The thing escalated. But that said, if you want to look at the long-term stability of Turkey and its future, it's going to have to accommodate its Kurdish citizens. And, unfortunately, that means you're going to have to deal with the people who have a lot of support, which is the PKK. Nobody sits here and admires them, but that's just the reality.
Okay, this is interesting. So,
but
go ahead.
He said a small incident. We're talking about a 14-year-old suicide bomber who is responsible for 52 lives in a wedding in the city of Gaziantep.
And things
That's what tipped things off after that.
Certainly, things unraveled since then. Borzou, let me ask you, the HDP is in parliament. The HDP from the very top, even President Erdogan has associated them with terrorists during the electoral campaign. They've got 67 MPs in parliament. How is that going to influence not only a possible peace process with the PKK, but also what happens across the border with the YPG and beyond in Syria?
I mean, that's a tough question to answer in the few seconds that we have here. But I will say that I'm not sure if Erdogan needs to not play the nationalist card anymore. I think that he still needs the MHP. You've had the MHP warn Erdogan already within the last 24 hours not to play the same role as Ahmet Davutoglu. That's code for making peace with the making peace talks with the PKK. So in a way, because Erdogan's party did not do so well in parliament, he is dependent on someone else for enacting legislation, getting certain things done. That might be the MHP. I think that a lot of people would be happier if it was the CHP. I don't think it's going to be the HDP. I think that the HDP is a reality. It's now the #3 party in the country in terms of parliamentary seats. I personally don't think it's helpful to call them terrorists.
Robert Pearson, we know what Turkey wants from the West. It wants a semblance of respect, and it doesn't want the West to give weapons to those that Turkey considers terrorists, those people who are associated with others who blow up Turkish cities and attack Turkish policemen and so forth. In a nutshell, if you could find a way to describe this, what does the United States want from Turkey?
I think the U.S. and Turkey want the same thing together, to be honest with you, and that is improve security along the Turkish-Syrian border and a larger scope for cooperation about the other issues in Syria and in the Middle East. And frankly, I think the U.S. is prepared to play that role, but it's going to have to be a two-way street. We don't owe anything that is a debt. We need to cooperate with Turkey, and I think the U.S. would be delighted to cooperate with Turkey as we find mutual ways to build on Manbij to do that, and frankly in the larger area where there are serious issues affecting the security of Syria and the region. So I'm hoping that the government, although it did run on a very nationalist plank and the MHP was essential to the government's gaining a majority in the parliament, I hope that we'll be able to find some additional ways to move forward together.
Viacheslav Matuzov, does this mean, when it comes to a place like Syria, that Russia still takes the lead and Turkey goes along with the Astana process and beyond?
Well, I don't consider that Russia is leading politically, because politically one country cannot be in the leading position in Syria at all, because the settlement of all Syrian crises should be made by all sides, all countries involved. I think that Russian, Turkish, Iranian efforts proved this very clearly for all. They achieved a good results, and I think that some troubles, some discomfort we have in Russian-Turkish relations vis-à-vis Syrian crisis because of Syrian military presence in northern area in Syria and the position of Syrian government acknowledged by Russia and not acknowledged by Turkish government. We have some small differences that can be solved during the peaceful political solution of Syrian crisis, with participation of Europe, United States, Turkey, and Arab states. I think that everything can be settled in the principles of international law, respecting Syrian independence and self-determination, and I think in this point we should work closely with Turkey. But bilateral relations between Russia and Turkey are very satisfactory. I think that it will be playing a growing role in political relations in Middle East, Turkey in the Middle East affairs. I think that we have a very good prospects.
Peter Galbraith, who needs whom more, the West or Turkey?
I suppose both need each other, but at this stage they have some very significant differences, particularly over Syria, perhaps also over Iraq and Iran, with the current administration. That said, I think it's possible that Trump and Erdogan have, I think, a good relationship. They're like-minded figures in some ways. And I think Trump is eager to pull U.S. troops out of Syria, which would in effect mean abandoning the Syrian Kurds, which is exactly what Erdogan wants.
Is Erdogan abandoning Syria's Kurds, Egemen Bagis?
Erdogan wants the pursuit of happiness of all people, no matter what their ethnicity or religious background is. He doesn't want anyone to suffer or violate the others. So in Syria, we believe in Syrians ruling their own territory, not a bloody dictator like Assad who kills people left and right, who bombs his own cities, and who kills so many civilians. Unfortunately, the international community has been quite ignorant to Erdogan's calls to bring real democracy to Syria. If Syrian people could have established their own democracies, their own political parties, and if they could govern themselves, we would not have to house 3.5 million Syrians. Now that we are in Afrin and we cleared the area of the terrorists, Syrian people from Afrin have started moving back. Now that we have agreed with our allies in Washington to cooperate on Manbij area, once Manbij is cleared of the terrorists, be it PKK or Daesh or Al-Qaeda or whoever, once the area is cleansed, people of Manbij region will go back to their own land and start producing and living and establishing their own lives.
Hold on for a second, Egemen Bagis. Let me get a response from Peter Galbraith, because we are running out of time, so I want everybody to have a pop. Peter Galbraith?
Well, I mean, obviously, there's certainly a difference of opinion as to what happened in Afrin, because Turkey went in and basically this was a Kurdish-populated area, and much of the Kurdish population has fled. My point wasn't that Erdogan was abandoning Syrian Kurds. He's always been the opponent of the Syrian Kurds, or at least those who are in control there. It is that they were the United States ally against the Islamic State, and that Trump has indicated that he's prepared to abandon them. And I think it's partly because he likes Erdogan. They have a lot of characteristics in common. And so I think that's one of the changes that may occur more broadly for Syria, like it or not. And I think most people don't. But the reality is that the Assad government has prevailed in the civil war. And so the issue now is to find some kind of settlement. I think Turkey could play a constructive role with the elements that are still outstanding, where you have arrangements that people can return home, some amnesty, some human rights protections. It's not going to be a glorious democratic future, which we all wish. But, under the circumstances, it's time to try to get the best settlement that ends the war.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Egemen Bagis, Borzou Daraghi, and the three ambassadors, Viacheslav Matuzov, Peter Galbraith, and Robert Pearson. I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers.